A very warm welcome to all of you here in the Bali. My name is Juri Albrecht. I'm the director of the Bali, and I'm conducting this conversation with our guest today, Bill Browder. Very happy that you're here on a lunch occasion, and you're right, of course, because you can ask questions afterwards, as always, after a conversation or a get-together in the Bali. So the people at home who are watching at home can't do that. So very warm welcome. Happy that you're here. I don't think I need to introduce our speaker of today, Bill Browder, or actually I should say actually Sir William. Very warm welcome to Sir William. You have been knighted William Browder by the English monarch. Yeah. So officially we should say Sir William.
But you can call me Bill.
That's very kind of you. I will try to remember that. Please put your phone on silent, but you can use it, of course, but in case you're being called or something like that. I'll introduce you anyway a little bit.
Sure.
You were one of the largest, actually the largest foreign investor in Russia until 2005, when you came across corruption and misconduct, and you took on a few very powerful Russians, among them Vladimir Putin himself. And as a result, the Kremlin labeled you as a threat to national security, which is a dubious honor, of course, actually a dangerous honor, being Russia's public enemy, maybe public enemy number one, to put it somewhat in the Orwellian tradition. When your lawyer Sergei Magnitsky died in a Russian prison, I would actually personally say was killed, but let's put it died. Bill launched a big fight, a lobbying effort to introduce what's been called after that the Magnitsky Act, aiming to allow Western countries to sanction Russian oligarchs. And it started in the United States, but it became, it adopted, the legislation was being implemented in many countries, including the EU. That's also thanks to the two politicians, Dutch politicians like Pieter Omtzigt and Sjoerd Sjoerdsma, then at that period CDA and D66, members of parliament. And today I'd like to talk with you, and I'm very happy that you take the time before you fly off from Schiphol in a little bit over 2 hours. We'll talk about Russia's horrific war. I think that's the main topic of today, horrific war against Ukraine. Maybe a little bit about the peace negotiations Trump tried to pull off. I wonder what you think about it. I think, for me, it's very hard to read what actually happened there. I wonder what you think about it. And once again, thank you very much for being here. So give him a warm welcome, Bill Browder.
Thank
you. You, like I just said, we're saying being Russia's public enemy. Probably, maybe to start off with that, what does it feel like being sort of the enemy of one of the most cruel dictators we have around?
So I should qualify a couple things. I think I was enemy number one until about, until the war started. I think Vladimir Zelensky is enemy number one.
He took over.
He took over. And Alexei Navalny was also enemy number one, and he's no longer with us. And I should just explain why I'm so hated by Putin very quickly. And then,
yeah, that's interesting. Because how did you come across his gaze? So,
well, I mean, it wasn't like I chose this path. As you mentioned, Sergei Magnitsky, and you mentioned the Magnitsky Act. The Magnitsky Act is. Its main feature is to freeze the assets and ban the travel of the people who killed Sergei Magnitsky and the people who commit human rights abuses in Russia, and eventually it was applied around the world. Vladimir Putin, his first and foremost task when he became president of Russia was to steal as much money as possible. And it's not something unique to Vladimir Putin. Every person who goes into public service in Russia goes into public service to steal money. So if you want to be, you have to pay to become a traffic policeman so you can stop cars and extort drivers. And all the way up, junior ministers, et cetera, prime minister, president, the higher you are, the more you steal. And so it's an absolute, completely criminalized kleptocracy. That's what Russia is. And it's hard to even imagine coming from any normal place. And in fact, when I've been around the world traveling and talking to business people and government officials, even in countries that are considered corrupt, they blanch at when I tell them the stories about the level of corruption in Russia. It's just off the charts. And so Putin's main objective in most of his presidency has been to steal as much money as possible and to lock people up, kill people, do whatever he has to do to steal the money. He values money more than human life. And all of a sudden, this guy from the south side of Chicago shows up, me, and in response to the murder of my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, and come up with this plan to freeze the assets of him, effectively. And it's absolutely, in his mind, obscene that somebody could do that. Somebody would do that. Somebody would have the brazenness to do that. And so there's two reasons why he hates me. One, I've gotten between him and his money, and he values money like nothing else. And two, if nobody like myself can do this, then and has the confidence to do this, and nothing bad happens to me, then other people are going to try to do similar types of things. And so he has to make an example out of me. And so I've been truly at the top of his list. And I'm not just exaggerating. When in the summit between Trump and Putin in 2018 in Helsinki, it was on a Monday, and on the previous Friday, Robert Mueller, the special counsel who was investigating Russian interference in the U.S. election, had indicted 12 Russian military intelligence officers. And so one of the first questions at the press conference afterwards to Putin was, are you going to hand over the 12 indicted GRU officers? And Putin said,
that's the Secret Service at GRU, one of the Secret Services.
That's their secret, their military intelligence. Those are the people who do all these assassinations and so on. And Putin said, yeah, it's possible we would, but we would only do so if we got reciprocal goodwill from our American friends, and specifically we would expect them to hand over Bill Browder, me.
He said it in a press conference.
In the press conference in front of the entire journalism pool of the world. And then the next obvious question was to President Trump, what do you think about this? And he said, I think it's an incredible offer. And it took 4 days and a vote of the Senate, 98-0, not to hand me over before it was
98-0.
98-0, not to hand me over before it was dismissed. And so when I say that I was like really like front and center of Putin's mind, I mean, at this meeting between him and the most powerful man in the free world, that was like one of his main asks.
The first thing that popped up in his mind was your name.
Yeah, exactly. And so how does it feel to be in this position? Not good, obviously. But I've been in this position for a really long time.
Yes.
This all started, the Magnitsky Act was passed in 2012. And since then, it's pretty much been that's the position I've been in, even before then, but really, like, that was when they really focused their minds on me. And I have to do a lot of things different than most people, but, 2012 or 2025, I've survived, 13 years. So they haven't got me yet.
I mean, you're literally touching wood, because...
you just don't know. I mean, and they're a very mean bunch of people with a lot of resources doing a lot of terrible stuff.
Yeah. I think it's important to ask. I'm terribly sorry to put you through this thing, because it must be also very threatening. But it's a very because on the top of the list actually exists, and they have a department of GRU who goes around the world and kills people.
Yep, they do. They do, and they've been at it. They've death threats, kidnapping threats. They've issued 8 Interpol arrest warrants for me, extradition requests from Britain, where I live.
Once you were arrested in Spain while you were helping the public prosecutor in Spain, but you were arrested because of one of those indictments by Interpol in Spain. Yeah. For instance. Yeah.
Yep. I was detained in Geneva. It happens. And for what it's worth, at the moment, I'm not traveling to the United States of America, my birth country. Because I don't know that they wouldn't hand me over.
This is literally chilling. Yeah, I'm so sorry. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's
Well, yeah.
a lot of people have a lot of problems in the world. This is a minor problem compared to some problems. So.
Because this list actually does exist. Christoph Grozev, one of the investigators of Bellingcat at that time, and now with the Grozev investigation platform. But a Bulgarian journalist, actually, investigative journalist, found the list on the internet with even his name on it, lower than yours, actually. And
but they've been more active with him. I mean, they really have gone crazy with him. So,
yeah. They were, I can tell now, they were secretly based on top of the Bali in the 3rd floor for quite some years, Bellingcat, and he used to work here in the cafe until it became literally too dangerous and he had to, nobody knows where he lives now. But coming back to the Magnitsky Act, maybe a little bit do some historical looking back, because, and I try to use this as a bridge because who are you as a foreigner, lobbying for doing getting these oligarchs under sanctions? But actually, as I understood from this wonderful book, I can really recommend Freezing Order. I think 3 years old, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And there's a scene in which Boris Nemtsov is being remembered. There's a memorial for Boris Nemtsov, actually the former most opposition figure before Navalny, who'd been killed by Putin as well. And Vladimir Kara-Murza gives a speech, another opposition leader, being poisoned, almost died because of this same GRU section who poisoned him, said, maybe we should try to sanction the people who killed Boris Nemtsov.
Yep.
And that was sort of the moment when you started to lobby for something which has been called now the Magnitsky Act. Is that sort of the first moment of it? That
wasn't the first moment of it. The first moment was, so Sergei Magnitsky was my lawyer in Russia. After I was kicked out of Russia, my offices were raided by the police, and the police seized all of our documents. And then the documents were used we didn't understand why the police took the documents. And Sergei, our lawyer, investigated, and he discovered the documents had been taken in order to execute a very complex fraud in which which the police, working together with organized criminals and tax officials, had stolen from the government, from the Russian government, $230 million of taxes that we paid to the Russian government. He exposed the crime, he testified against the officials involved, and then he was arrested by the same people he exposed, put in pretrial detention, tortured for 358 days, and killed in Russian police custody by 8 riot guards with rubber batons who beat him to death on November 16, 2009. And it was his murder which changed my life. I gave up my life as a businessman and became a justice seeker, a justice campaigner, specifically to get justice for Sergei Magnitsky, and that was the plan. And I thought at the time that we might even be able to get justice inside of Russia, at least partial justice, because we knew the names of the guys who did the beating. They wrote their names down on the forms. We knew the names of the people who were profiting from the crime that Sergei Magnitsky exposed. It was all documented, and we put all these documents into the public domain. We filed criminal complaints, and then remarkably, Vladimir Putin personally got involved in the cover-up. He at their annual press conference that year. He runs this 4.5-hour press conference at Christmas time. He publicly announced that no crimes were committed, that there was nothing done. And Sergei Magnitsky and Bill Browder were the criminals, and so on and so forth. And it became obvious we weren't going to be able to get justice inside of Russia. So we said, how do we get justice outside of Russia? And that's when I came up with this idea, which is that the guys who killed Sergei did it for money, and they keep that money abroad. And so I said to myself that that's one way. We can't prosecute them in America or Europe for murder that was committed in Russia. We don't have jurisdiction. But we certainly don't have to allow them to keep their money here, and if they have any money here, we can freeze it. And that's when I went and got the Magnitsky Act started. When I met two senators, a Democrat and Republican, John McCain, the Republican, Benjamin Cardin, the Democrat, and they sort of ran with this idea. And they mentioned the two people who helped me were Boris Nemtsov, Boris Nemtsov was leader of the opposition of Russia at the time, and his protege, a young man named Vladimir Kara-Murza. And that scene you referred to was, so the Magnitsky Act was passed in 2012, and everybody who was involved in it became people on their hit list. And I believe that Boris Nemtsov was murdered for his involvement in the Magnitsky Act. And Vladimir Kara-Murza, who was the other person who was involved, as you mentioned, he was going in and out of Moscow, and he was poisoned, and he nearly died. He was poisoned with the same poison that they gave to Alexei Navalny and the same poison that they gave to Sergei Skripal in Salisbury by the same team.
Yeah, they have a little, actually a little lab in Moscow where they produce this sort of very...
It's hugely, it's a military grade nerve toxin called Novichok. And so the Magnitsky Act really got them very angry.
They got them very, and like you said, because it came between Putin and his money, and he's doing all those horrible acts and horrific things because of that money, of course. So it gets him very, very nervous and angry. Have you ever met Vladimir Putin?
Nope, never met him.
Never.
No.
And because after that, he not only became a gangster. You described in your book, you once called him a leader of a mafia state.
Yeah.
And so not only he became a gangster, but he also became a conqueror, an imperialist, a neo-colonialist. What do you think Putin's aims are if he transfer it to his wars, his European wars? Or?
So it's the crucial question. What are his aims? And I believe that 95% of the world doesn't understand why he's doing what he's doing, and their misunderstanding has led to all sorts of very big mistakes in policy. So what I've learned, and I can draw a line directly from the murder of Sergei Magnitsky to the war in Ukraine, is after Sergei was killed, in addition to the Magnitsky Act, we said, who got the money? Who got that $230 million that he was killed over? And so we started to trace it. And I put one guy on my team full-time, and he's been working on it since then, to a forensic investigator to figure out who got the money. And we figured out a lot of stuff, but the one thing that was most interesting was we discovered that 200 of the 230 million had been laundered through Danske Bank in their Estonian branch. Danske is Denmark's largest
Danish
bank.
Big Danish bank, yeah.
And
their Estonian branch. Yeah.
And so we published we produced a criminal complaint. We filed it with the Estonian and the Danish criminal authorities, the prosecutor's office. And whenever we do this, we always publicize that we're filing a complaint, because oftentimes police and prosecutors won't do anything unless they understand that the public opinion is watching. And as a result of the publicity, we got contacted by a major Danish newspaper called Berlingske, which is one of their biggest newspapers. And Berlingske had coincidentally just come across a huge data leak. It was called the Russian Laundromat. And the data leak came from inside of Danske Bank and had all sorts of unstructured account information. And they didn't know what to do with it. And they thought, well, maybe because we have made this discovery, if they looked at our criminal complaint, they could see the names of the accounts, the account numbers, they could draw some conclusions from our information to make a bigger conclusion about other money that had been stolen from Russia. So we always cooperated with journalists, and because we combine efforts, we discover more things. We gave our complaints and all the background information to the journalists. They went away for a week, and they came back and said, actually, it wasn't 200 million of stolen money in Russia that was laundered through Danske Bank. It was 8.3 billion. They put it all together. They published the article, and it was the most read article in the history of Berlingske newspaper in their 200 years. And Denmark prides itself on being a really honest country. It's ranked number 2 in the world by Transparency International in terms of being the most honest country. I think only New Zealand is above them. And so it wasn't as if the CEO of Danske Bank could just say fake news and just forget about it. He had to do something. And so he then hired a external law firm, an external accounting firm, and an external data analysis firm. And they went to work and they lifted the entire hood, let them access to everything. And it took them, I think, 6 months to do this. And they came back and they said, actually, it wasn't 8.3 billion of dirty money from Russia, stolen money from Russia, from the government, laundered through our bank. It was $232 billion. Okay, so this is one mid-sized Scandinavian bank that we had the opportunity, not we, but somebody had the opportunity to lift the hood and look underneath. And they came up with 232 billion. In my estimation, if you were to have the same opportunity at Raiffeisen in Vienna, at Deutsche Bank
in Frankfurt,
at Credit Suisse and UBS in Zurich, ING Bank here, I think that you'd get a number closer to $1 trillion of money stolen from the Russian state by Putin and 1,000 other individuals.
Is that's so the oligarchy is that big? Is
1,000 individuals. When you say oligarchy, we always think of oligarchs being these guys like Roman Abramovich sitting on his yacht. But the head of the prosecutor's office is another very rich man.
That's part of it.
And the head of the Russian FSB, their secret police, is another very rich man. And so there are these sort of public oligarchs and then there are private oligarchs. But all the money to put together is $1 trillion that was stolen from Russia in different ways. And that was money that should have been spent on it should have been spent on health care and
pensions
and schools and roads. Instead, it was spent on private jets, yachts, Swiss bank accounts, villas in the south of France. And what that does, so if this group of people had stolen 50 billion instead of $1 trillion over a 20-year period, they probably could have relaxed. But they just stole too much money. And
they stole too much money in which way? Because this is, I understand where you're getting at, but this is still the answer to what are Putin's Putin aiming. You're coming there.
I'm coming to that right now.
Yeah.
Just, sorry for the long.
No, don't worry.
You need to understand this, and when you do understand this, you understand everything. So it's like spreading gasoline on the ground in Russia by having everybody live in destitute poverty except for 1,000 people who have all the money in the world that was stolen from them. And all it takes is some event, like in Tunisia, the fruit seller set himself on fire, and that set off the Arab Spring. Just one match, and this gasoline goes on fire, and then 1 million people are marching on Red Square.
Yeah.
And so what is Putin afraid of? Why is Putin doing this war? What is motivating Putin? Is he's a little man, scared to death, he's stolen too much money, and he's absolutely terrified that someday, for events that he can't control, 1 million people are going to march on Red Square and hang him from a lamppost. That's what he's afraid of.
Which happened to Mussolini. Yeah.
And Gaddafi and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And so what does Putin do as a scared little man? Tiny little guy he is. What does he do? Well, he doesn't want to wait for this to happen. And so he just gets out Machiavelli 101.
The prince, il principe.
And he creates a foreign enemy and he starts a war. This is not sophisticated political science. This is just basic human behavior. The war with Ukraine, which started in 2014, it didn't start in
Absolutely.
2022.
No.
The war in Ukraine was a manufactured conflict. There was no real issue between Russia and Ukraine other than he needed an enemy. And he wanted to pick a weak enemy and a nearby enemy. And by the way, it worked for him. It worked for him in 2014. His approval ratings went up when he took Crimea, and it wasn't all that costly to the Russian economy, and it was all pretty great for Putin. And it solidified his power, and there was somebody else to be angry at. And then COVID came, and everyone was stuck in their houses and their apartments, and lockdowns and all this terrible stuff. And all over the world, all sorts of leaders were losing their positions because of COVID. And Putin was terribly afraid of that. And that's what led him to up the ante and launch the full-scale war, which he thought he was going to win in 3 days. And the reason why this is so important, and the reason why I told a long story about this, is because everybody thinks this war is about reasons that have nothing to do with this war. This war was not started because of NATO enlargement. That's a Kremlin propaganda talking point. This war is not started because they need that specific piece of territory. If you look at a map of Russia, it is the biggest goddamn country you could ever imagine. There's no country that comes even close to the size of this country. It's just gigantic. If you have a minute and you take one thing away from my talk, look at a map of Russia. The amount of territory they're getting from this Ukraine is just de minimis in this big, enormous country. It doesn't, and it's not because it's not because he's a patriot that he wants to recreate some empire. He's not a patriot. You don't steal $1 trillion and have everybody die at the age of 62. All men die at the age of 62 from low life expectancy because all the money has been taken away. If you're a patriot, and so the problem is that these are the 3 reasons why people attribute his war. So all these people, some with goodwill, some with bad will, all want to go and negotiate a settlement with him, but the only settlement that he would be willing to negotiate is if somebody could guarantee him he could keep his money, stay in power, and stay alive. And nobody can guarantee him that. Nobody should guarantee him that. And therefore, and so every time Donald Trump said, I'm going to end this war in 24 hours, I said, even if he wanted to end this war in 24 hours, which I'm not sure he really does, he has no capacity to do that because he can't guarantee can't guarantee Putin what he wants.
So is his aim now, this is how he got into it? Huh? There's a clear reason behind it. You explained it. Is this still his aim perpetual war, actually, in order to stay in power?
His aim is to have a foreign enemy to stay in power so he doesn't get strung up.
Yeah.
And therefore, there is the only way to end this war is for Ukraine to win the war.
Mm-hmm. And now it seems like he's spreading his aggression towards the Baltics and towards Poland.
Of course he is, and he will. And so the only thing that we have to protect us are the Ukrainians.
So the only thing that we Europeans
have
to protect us
is the Ukrainians.
It's Ukrainian citizens and
who are fighting our war for us because he would be at war with us, and he's already giving us a little taste of it right now with the 16 drones into Poland and the 3 jets into Estonia and the drone infringements in airports in Munich and Oslo and
Berlin,
Copenhagen and during the Paris Olympics when they blew up trains. I mean, they're doing so much nasty stuff, really low-grade nasty stuff right now. And the only way that we're protected is because the Ukrainians have them fully engaged. And for us to even murmur the idea that we need to lower our support for the Ukrainians is just suicide.
How do you look upon the Alaska summit with Trump? And you mentioned a little bit, if Trump thinks that he can end it in 24 hours with Trump and Putin in Alaska. What happened there?
Well, what happened there...
What were we looking at? I don't have the foggiest, actually, if I look at it. Was it like theater, or was it the absolute stupidness of Trump, or was it both, or was it none of that? Was it very smart trying to make broker deals for rare earth, or what do you think it was?
Well, we don't really know what's going on with Trump, but all we know is what's happened with Trump. Mm-hmm. So we don't know what his intentions are. Well, I mean, we can speculate, and I'm not going to spend too much time speculating. I'm just going to look at the facts. Mm-hmm. So Trump comes into power, and the first thing he said on the day he was inaugurated was that he wants to end this war in Ukraine. He wants Putin to end the war, and if he doesn't, there's going to be tariffs, taxes, and sanctions. That's what he said on February, or January. It was January 22nd. That was what he said. And then there was the absolute horrific Oval Office meeting with Zelensky, where he said to Zelensky, "You shouldn't have started this war."
Yeah.
And he kicked him out. And then there was the absolutely unbelievable, shocking rare earths negotiation where he said all money that has been given to Ukraine in military aid should be paid back to the United States. I've never heard of a situation where the victim should pay war reparations to the supporter. Unbelievable. Thankfully, they never did that deal. And then, of course, there was both sides need to agree a ceasefire immediately, a 30-day ceasefire. And Zelensky said, I agree. And Putin said, I don't. And he said, if he doesn't do it in 30 days, then it's going to be we're going to impose all sorts of crippling sanctions. 30 days comes, 30 days goes. He's made 8 ultimatums of Putin. 8. And then on the 8th ultimatum, he's going to come to Alaska and they're going to sort this thing out. They have these U.S. military guys on their knees rolling out the red carpet. I mean, that image alone is going to go down as one of the most shameful images in the U.S. history, rolling out the red carpet for a mass murdering dictator. I mean, it's just shocking. You know, if Neville Chamberlain got a bad rap
after Munich 38,
which with all good intentions, that one is going to go really down badly.
This is something else
in history. And of course, there was no consequence to that.
For Russia, you mean? There were no consequences?
For Putin. This is the 8th ultimatum, nothing happened. And so we don't know what Trump is up to, but whatever it is, it's not ending the war. The only way to end the war is the strategy of and by the way, Biden was less offensive, but not all that much more helpful to the Ukrainians. He gave them weapons enough so that they could not lose the war, but he didn't allow them to use any weapons to fight back against Russians in their own territory. So he said, you can only use weapons in your own territory. So the Russians would gather battalions across the border, and they weren't allowed to bomb the Russian gatherings of military. And so perhaps the single best thing that Trump, and the final fact is that Trump has withdrawn U.S. military aid for Ukraine. That's the fact. All this talk is talk. America no longer militarily supports Ukraine. So that's the resume of the United States foreign policy towards Ukraine right now. And so Putin is in a relatively...
They're selling some weapons, are they?
They're selling weapons to us.
Yeah. Us Europeans. Yeah.
And we pay for the weapons. But he's stopped supporting Ukraine. So, here we are in this situation. But the one big favor he did to Ukraine, and this is very helpful, is because he stopped giving money to Ukraine, he can't tell them what to hit and what not to hit. And so one of the things which they're doing, and it's become sort of like a meme on the internet, is every day they're hitting oil refineries in Russia. Oil refineries are the backbone or one of the main backbones of their economy, and they've taken out, or through their actions have reduced Russia's ability to refine oil by 40%. And that's meaningful. As we're sitting around twiddling our thumbs and gazing our navels, talking about sanctions or not sanctions, he's imposing sanctions, real sanctions, on a daily basis.
Talking about sanctions, there's been the 19th sort of edition of European sanctions. It's just passing now in Brussels, the 19th edition of it. What do you think about that? It's a great thing that we do another round of sanctions, or is it?
Well, I wish they would listen to me, because I could tell them what to do.
Which would be? Which
would be very simple. So they've sanctioned some military intelligence officer in some place or whatever, and no one knows who he is, and how's that going to change the outcome? I mean, go ahead, sanction him, no problem. But if you look at how is it that Russia has been able, with all the sanctions that we've imposed so far, been able to continue to conduct the war? And the answer is that there's one huge elephant in the room, which is oil. Russia exports a huge amount of oil. Since the beginning of the war, the Chinese, the Indians, and the Turks have given the Russians $400 billion of money in exchange for their oil. And that's the way that Putin affords this war.
Yeah, so it's a good idea to bomb his refineries.
Okay, but they still export the oil. Well, guess what? There are 8 buyers, 8 oil refineries in India, China, and Turkey that buy all the oil. 8. Just 8. So every sanctions list has got 2,000 people sanctioned, some guy here, some guy there. 8 refineries buy all the oil. So my idea, and I'm pitching this to people that will listen, but the trouble is that there's so many bureaucrats with all these little, these little minuscule things that they're doing, is to basically say to these 8 refineries, you have until, let's say, December 1st to stop buying Russian oil. On December 1st, if you buy 1 drop of Russian oil, you will not be able to sell a single anything to any of us, the United States, EU, UK, Canada, Australia, Japan. And you can't sell us anything, you can't do business with us, we can't sell you technology, you can't bank with us, you can't insure with us, you can't do anything with us. I would guess that most of those refineries would say, is it really worth it for the discount that I'm getting on Russian oil to ruin my entire worldwide trade relationship? And my guess is that maybe the Chinese won't buy into it, but everybody else will.
The Indians and the Turks will.
The Indians and the Turks will, because in India and Turkey, all the refineries are privately owned.
Yeah.
And
so if you would sanction them, they would rather put their eggs in the European and free trade basket than into the Russian basket.
And then what would happen to all that oil? The oil would still become pirate oil of some sort, but it would be selling at $20 a barrel, not 60.
So it would be more difficult to finance this war.
And then Putin would basically, in 6 months' time, I think he'd run out of money.
But I mean, that's a great idea, very practical, but we can't even stop the Europeans from buying his oil.
Well, we have to stop ourselves from buying the oil as well. I mean, it's we all have to suck up our gut here, because it's absurd. We're giving Putin money to finance his war, and then we're giving money to Ukraine to fight back. Why don't we just stop doing that?
Yeah, it would be cheaper.
Yeah.
And ending the war quicker.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you think? Maybe first, related to that is of course the fact that there's 300 billion euros sitting in Belgium, which are sovereign wealth of Russia. And why don't we use that money for financing the Ukrainian war? Can you explain me why we don't?
No. I can't, because we will.
We will?
We will. So when the war started, one of the first things we did, one of the best things we did.
The Belgian Prime Minister said literally, it's not going to happen.
Well,
because it's sitting in Belgium in the banks.
Yeah, we will. It's going to happen. I mean, I've heard a million people in government positions tell me everything I've ever tried to do isn't going to happen, and then it happens. So the simple answer is when the war started, we froze in the West $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves. The war has gone on for 3.5 years. It's probably caused $1 trillion of damage to the Ukrainians.
$1 trillion by now?
I think it's $1 trillion. I mean, there's estimates are between 500 billion and $1 trillion. Who knows exactly how to measure it?
So 300 billion would be a little bit
a third,
a little bit under 1/3. Yeah.
So Ukrainians are owed that money. The Russians believe that it's okay to invade a country, cause $1 trillion of damage, and then scream bloody murder that their 300 billion is protected by what's called sovereign immunity. And I just don't think that that's reasonable, and nor does any reasonable person. I mean, it's morally incorrect, it's financially incorrect, and it's politically incorrect to allow them to keep that money.
So why does Bart de Wever think that's not going to happen? Why does he say
he's just a coward. So the money is stuck in his country. It's unfortunate for him that's where the money is. The money is deposited at Euroclear, which is a place where the Russians kept their custody of their central bank reserves. And it's unfortunate for him that it's in his country, because he's scared. He thinks, okay, he takes the money and he's going to get killed by the Russians or something like that. That he's personally scared that he's going to get killed by the Russians. And so it's kind of hard for him.
And the Russians are known to do these sort of things.
Yeah, well, he should just beef up his security, but he shouldn't. He shouldn't sacrifice the. Anyways, so since the Americans have pulled out, and they supply 40% of the military aid for Ukraine, one of two things has to happen in Europe. Either we have to let the Ukrainians try to fight it out with a lot less resources, which means that probably they could lose, or we increase taxes on all of our citizens so that they get the money that they need to fill in the American gap, or we take Putin's money. And so I think, you've got an election coming up here in 3 weeks. I don't think that raising taxes is like the thing that anyone wants to be talking about. The French have lost 3 prime ministers over a budget. The UK chancellor is probably going to get fired because she's got to raise taxes and lower and cut welfare. I don't think anyone wants to be digging further into their own pockets when Putin's money is sitting right there. And so the reason I think it's going to happen, well, first of all, I'm not the only one who thinks it's going to happen. Friedrich Merz, the German chancellor, has decided he's in favor of it. And I think when the Germans kind of get their shoulder into something, it's usually more likely to happen.
That's usually the way it works in Europe, in the
Right.
European Union. Yeah. Would you, because those people, those people around Putin and Putin himself, you just described how they stole over $1 trillion euros. Would they be, because it's taking so long, and I'm sometimes wondering, are they buying people in Europe? Are they?
Oh my God, are they buying people in Europe? I don't know if you guys saw this, but in the UK they just found a member of the Reform Party. This is Nigel Farage's party, who was a member of the European Parliament before UK left before Brexit. He was found to have on 8 different counts taken money from the Russians to do various political things for them, and he's pled guilty. And that's just, there are everywhere people on the take. Putin just goes out and he identifies everybody who's got influence, and then he offers them, not personally, he finds people to offer them money, girls, boys, whatever it is that people want. And 1 out of every 25 says yes.
And people who are actually doing legislation or parliamentarians. Because I just came across a VVD senator who yesterday found his courage and remembered that he really liked the liberal values of the Liberal Party, and so he stepped out of it just before the elections and blamed the leadership of his party. But then I dug into it a little bit. Kees van der Sanden, very principled interview yesterday or the day before yesterday in the Volkskrant, our biggest quality newspaper, where he was very principled about the liberal democracy. But not too long ago, not even half a year ago, the Financial Times, the Financiële Dagblad, found out that he was the lawyer for Lukoil, who's owned by one of the personal friends of Putin.
Yeah.
And so I asked the VVD, and they said, yes, we've been having trouble with him on his standpoint on Russia for already more than a year. So he suddenly refound his liberal principles. Interesting, I thought. Is this could be the way it works?
Well, I don't know about this specific example, and so I wouldn't want to defame this individual.
I understand.
Of course it works that way. And Marine Le Pen received financing which has been documented from a Russian bank. Her campaign received financing from a Russian bank.
Several million.
Yeah. And this is, of course, just what's been disclosed and what we know about. Salvini, the Italian, was in Moscow wearing Putin T-shirts and also receiving financing. We have this member of the Reform Party in the UK who was just found guilty of this stuff.
The leader of the biggest party in the Dutch parliament was for 5 days in the Kremlin. He posted it on, Geert Wilders, he posted it on internet, but nobody knows what he did there, what he discussed.
Well, we could probably safely assume is what the Russians discussed with him, which is, don't support sanctions, don't support military aid for Ukraine and all that kind of stuff. Whether he agrees to that or not, I don't know. But that's what the Russians would have been pitching him on for 5 days in the Kremlin.
Yeah. What would be your educated guess on how is the conflict in Ukraine going to go forward or going to end?
At the moment, it's an absolute stalemate. Mm-hmm. The Ukrainians. And by the way, the Russians don't win wars. This is one of Trump's big statements: you don't pick a fight with a country like Russia because they always win their wars. They don't win wars. They haven't won a war in a very long time. They didn't win in Afghanistan. They didn't win in Georgia. They're not winning in Ukraine. Russia tends to lose wars. And so they're in a stalemate right now. And why are they in a stalemate? Because, if the Taliban can get rid of the Soviets, imagine the Ukrainians with some technology and some the Ukrainians care about what's going on in there. I mean, they don't want to be invaded because if they don't want to be occupied, because if they get occupied, look at Bucha. The women all get raped, the men get tortured, castrated, and killed, and the children get kidnapped. That's what Russian occupation looks like to the Ukrainians. And so
kidnapped to be raised in Russia as a part of the Russian.
Your children get stolen. So any father who has daughters and children is not going to want to. They'll fight to the death. And so the Ukrainians are going to fight, because even if the war is the most unpleasant thing imaginable, occupation is even more unpleasant. And so they'll fight. And they actually have some tools to fight with. They have their, they've come up, they've put all of the Western defense industry to shame with their drone technology. And they've created a situation where it's effectively a no-go zone. You cannot go in the front line, nobody can go there without dying. And so the Russians routinely send people in to try to penetrate Ukraine, and they all die. And so the Russians are losing 1,000 men a day. And so it's effectively a stalemate. The Russians are not getting more territory. So how does this end? It ends in one of two ways. Either the Russians finally give up because they tire of the whole thing.
Is that possible?
And that's possible if we take away their financial lifeblood.
Their income, their oil.
Yeah.
But that, Turkish don't vote for Christmas, isn't it? So Putin would never do that, because that would probably mean the end of he would end up on the lamppost next to the Kremlin.
But we have the ability to, if we stop these 8 refineries from buying his oil in 6 months' time, he doesn't have the money to do it anymore. How does he get soldiers? He gets soldiers by paying $75,000 sign-on bonus. $75,000 in rural Russia is like $2 million here, and so he's.
So that explains the poor guys who are going there.
Who were then sent into battle into this drone zone where they all get assassinated.
It's really a lot of money.
It's a huge amount of money
for them. Yeah.
But interestingly, I just read an article yesterday that the military recruitment is drying up even with that amount of money, because people understand that it's just suicide.
It's literally Russian roulette. Yeah.
Nobody survives it.
Even worse. Yeah.
Nobody survives it. And so, the downside, how this ends up badly for us, is that we get the governments. Putin has been in power for 25 years. Sergei Lavrov, as foreign minister, has been the same foreign minister for 25 years, and we have democracy here where people are constantly changing. And we can say, our government here today can say, as long as it takes, we're with the Ukrainians, and then you end up with a new government in 3 weeks that says, actually, no, we don't want to do that anymore. And that's what happened with America. America had a government with the Ukrainians as long as it takes, and then all of a sudden it wasn't as long as it takes. And so Putin is hoping that he can just outlast us and wait for, and have some influence on the process, and then wait for it to turn in his direction.
Have some influence on elections, for instance.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and hope that Marine Le Pen will be elected and help him.
It didn't work for him in Moldova. In Moldova, the Russians spent a huge amount of money trying to, literally paying cash to Moldovans to pay for the Russian-supported candidate, and it didn't work. But you just don't know how it's going to work, and everybody is worried about other things other than Russia and Ukraine in most countries when they're voting. And in the UK, Reform is saying it's all about immigration, and so people who are people in the UK actually support Ukraine, but maybe not as importantly as they don't like immigrants.
So it would end badly for us if Putin outlives democratically elected opponents and can put his puppets in there, or his parties.
Yeah,
is that a real possibility?
It's absolutely a possibility. AfD in Germany is the most popular party. AfD doesn't support Ukraine.
And it's probably much more cheaper to buy and to influence an election with a few $100 million than it is to wage war.
It's like 1/10,000th the price.
Yeah,
and they don't care if they get caught.
No, they don't.
They'll just keep on trying and trying and trying again.
How did you look upon Angela Merkel going around of the past few days, going to Viktor Orban and then blaming the Poles and the Baltics for what's going on in Ukraine?
I wrote a tweet when I read about that story saying that it was absolutely shameful and good riddance that we don't have to deal with her anymore.
And we have Merz.
He's a strong one on this issue. I mean, I'm not intimate with German politics, but on Ukraine and on defense, he's been strong. I'm not sure if the rest of the world really wants this, but he's going to make Germany into a military superpower with $1 trillion. Do we want a German military superpower? I'm not sure, but
on the other hand, if we have a war going on,
we're going to need somebody to defend us because,
Maybe we're going also to look into the audience for questions. But what are you working on now? This book came out 3 years ago. What's your main occupation at the moment? I'm a human rights activist.
Well, I'm working on my third book,
which is going to be. Can you elaborate a little bit?
What's that?
Can you elaborate a little bit?
I mean, originally it was going to be a book about my friend Vladimir Kara-Murza, who was the one who helped me get the Magnitsky Act passed, who they poisoned twice. And then when the war started, he went back to Russia to protest the war. I begged him not to go. He decided to go anyways. And then within like a week, they arrested him and sentenced him to 25 years in a solitary confinement in Siberian prison, recovering from the after effects of these two poisoning attempts. And he was going to die in prison. So I spent 2.5 years going to every place and every politician and every government trying to get him out. And we succeeded, and he was included in the prisoner swap on August 1st.
Just recently.
On August 1st, a year ago, August 1st, and has survived. And in fact, I was just with him yesterday in The Hague, celebrating the farewell party for Peter Omtzigt.
And so it's going to
be about the mission to get him out of prison. And that's where it was supposed to end, on a happy note. But then Trump showed up and decided to give the money, or to stop the money from going to Ukraine. And so the other big thing I've been working on is getting the $300 billion confiscated. And so hopefully the happy ending in the book will be when they confiscate the money.
And use it
for the defense
or rebuilding of the Ukrainian economy or country. What's this going back to Russia by leaders of the opposition? I mean, Vladimir Kara-Murza did. You said you tried to tell him not to go. Navalny died. Actually, got the same sort of sentence and died. Yeah. Probably heightened the sort of necessity for you to get Kara-Murza out because Navalny did the same thing. Are they? Can you explain? Because you know Kara-Murza very well. You spent. It's a good friend of yours. I mean, how on earth would you go back? I mean, Putin will kill you. What's this going back?
Well, there's a certain type of person who, and it's very rare. I mean, we see in America politicians aren't even really willing to risk their career for their country. But you have a certain type of politician in certain countries where people are, for their country, they're ready to sacrifice everything, and that's what these two individuals were doing, Navalny. And it's not just in Russia. I met a Nicaraguan opposition politician who went back to Nicaragua, knowing that he would be arrested, and was arrested, and he was eventually released. I've seen this over and over again. There are certain types of people that do this, and sometimes they become world leaders, sometimes they die. And
what purpose would it have to get killed by the dictator you're opposing?
That's the argument I made to Vladimir Kara-Murza when he was going back.
What did he say to you?
He said, "This is my country. These are my people. If I'm too afraid to go back, how can I lead the people? How can I ask people to stand up to Putin, etc.?"
It's out of an idea that you really have to lead the people and give an example.
That was his argument.
Yeah, that was his argument. Yeah. Did you believe him?
I think he can be much more effective alive than dead, and that was my argument back to him.
Well, you were in a way maybe both right, because you managed to get him out, with many others, but you were very instrumental in that. And he proved that he is a real leader of the opposition by doing it.
And perhaps he will. I mean, he elevate. I mean, to take that kind of risk and to be a martyr for your patriotism of your country, perhaps when Putin does collapse or fall, if that and he does so in a disorganized way, someone like Vladimir Kara-Murza would have the credibility to be a leader in Russia through that. So who knows what the right answer is to these questions? For me, the right answer is not going back and putting yourself in harm's way, but for him, maybe the right answer was having done that.
Mm-hmm. So the 300 billion Russian assets is sort of the succession to the Magnitsky Act, actually, for you.
Well, I kind of felt like I was a victim, Sergei was a victim, Boris Nemtsov was a victim in our own sort of microcosm way. And we were the canary in the coal mine, and now the Ukrainians are on a much, much more horrific level the victims. And I sympathize with them, and I feel like I have common cause with them, and the one way that I can really help them is by getting them the resources to fight and end this war.
Thank you very much for all your thoughts and frank speaking, and actually for your work and deeds. Like I said, there might be people who have a question and want to participate. There's several actually. That's wonderful. I come to you with the mic. Otherwise, the people at home can't hear you, and it would be difficult to follow. I come over to you, and you first here, I think.
First of all, thank you very much for your great effort to be a justice fighter. Really appreciate that. My question is, you have described and experienced the mafia state developing in Russia. We see similar movements in the US, and you have a background there as well. And it's difficult, but what are your ideas about how this is going to evolve in the US? Well,
that's a really, that's the $10 trillion question. So what we're seeing now is the same motivations that Putin had. Putin didn't. So if you're a leader and you want to have unbridled power, you've got to get rid of the institutions that bridle your power. You have to go after the media. You have to go after the opposition. You have to go after judges. And so that's what they're doing in America. And so the question is, and that's what Putin did. It wasn't Russia didn't go from democracy to dictatorship overnight. It took a long time, and he degraded all the different sources of constraint. And so the question is, and I don't know the answer to this question. Will they become so upset with judges that they start disappearing judges? Because right now judges are acting independently in the United States for the most part. I mean, there's a few that aren't, but if all of a sudden, to act independently and to rule against the government were to be a death sentence, would judges continue to act independently? Will they start arresting opposition politicians? Trump said that Governor Pritzker and the mayor of Chicago should be arrested. Will they really be arrested? If they are, that's then a lot of people have to make big choices about whether they want to be opposition politicians. Will journalists start being killed? So far, they've just been sued a few times, mostly lost. And then the question is, in Russia, people were very fatalistic and very pessimistic. Would the American people allow that to happen? And I don't know the answers to any of these questions. Nobody knows the answers to any of these questions. I'm hopeful that the American people have much higher expectations for what their government should look like and what the country should look like, and there'll be red lines. And there were some red lines, like Trump wanted to fire Jimmy Kimmel, and all of a sudden and Disney fired him, and everybody canceled their subscription. And everybody I know canceled their subscription, and he was then reinstated within a week. And so there's lots of checks and balances, and midterms coming up, and so on and so forth. So I don't. The jury's out in a big way, but the intentions are there.
Mm-hmm. Please, yes, I hold it for you.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks to the Bali for partnering with us at the Moscow Times for this. Following on from your question, from your point about how European governments are saying that thanks to Russia's sovereign immunity, we can't transfer these frozen assets. What have you heard from the conversations you've been having about European powers continuing to comply with decisions from Russian courts? Last week, the Financial Times reported that European lawmakers are considering transferring €2 billion, euros, I believe, in assets to RBI Bank after they initially blocked the transfer of these assets because they were connected to a firm in which the oligarch Oleg Deripaska was, he had, I think, a 24% share in them. And it was initially blocked, but now they're considering going along with it anyway. What have you heard about that, and whether Europe is going to continue this acting on these decisions?
Well, it's a really technical question, and I've read the headlines of the story, but I haven't read into it enough to come up with a blistering condemnation or a support of the whole thing. I mean, on a sort of related matter, the Russians are threatening to confiscate. So if we confiscate the 300 billion, they want to confiscate all the private property of Western companies in Russia, which belongs to a couple Austrian banks and a few other things. And I say, good, anybody who had their money in Russia still should have their we shouldn't be worried about any Austrian bank that had a bunch of assets in Russia confiscated. But I don't know enough about that particular, the story you're talking about to give you an informed answer.
I think I saw more hands. Yes, I'm coming here and I'm coming over there. Please.
So first of all, thank you for your courage in doing what you're doing. You mentioned that Putin is fighting these wars because he's scared that the people will stand up and there will be an internal revolt. What do you think are the chances for something like that to happen?
Well, I think the chances depend on all circumstances. So if life gets a lot, so right now the Ukrainians have taken out all these oil refineries, and there's now gas shortages all over Russia. So Putin said to the Russian people, this is a special military operation. Why did he call it a special military operation? Because that made it sound like it's not a war, but it's a special military operation. And why did he want people and by the way, he prosecuted anybody who called it a war and sentenced them to 8 years in jail because it's a special military operation. He wanted everyone to think of this as some kind of contained thing, off in the distance, doesn't really affect you, and particularly when it comes to Muscovites and people in St. Petersburg, which is where the sort of elite live. And it's not, the war comes back to everybody. If it's a war and everybody feels the war, like they can't get gas because it's a war, or their neighbor is dead because it's a war, or their standard of living has gone down because it's a war, then there's the possibility of an uprising. And so the reason he's made it very special military operation-like and only drafted people in the poorest parts of the country and all this kind of stuff is to try to make it so that there isn't the possibility of an uprising, particularly where he is and where it counts. But these circumstances are not within his control. I mean, he can try to control them, but they're also within our control. So if, for example, we do this thing with the oil refineries in China and Turkey and India, and all of a sudden, the tax or the government budget revenues go down by 50%, all of a sudden they're going to have to start cutting costs in all sorts of places. Then people get angry because they're not getting their money, and so it's hard to know. There's no way to calculate. There's a simple equation which is impossible to calculate, which is at what point do people's anger get greater than their fear? Right now, the fear, and he can control people's fear, but he can't control their anger. Right now, he elevates fear, but at a certain point, he has no more fearful stuff to instill fear, And the anger level continues to rise. And if it gets to a point where people just don't care anymore, they're so angry, and they're angry en masse, that's when you have a public uprising. That's when you have a regime change. But there's no way to mathematically calculate that. And it's all based on circumstances, some which are within his control and some not, and some are within our control.
Mm-hmm. I believe you had a question as well.
Yeah. It's so very interesting and intriguing what you have told us. I'm very unknown and illiterate about anything about politics, apart from what I read in papers, and I read your book, and I admire your braveness. It's still a fairy tale. How can people not act if we all know what you have told us? So my question is, well, if it's true what you said, okay. I would like to ask a question from a long time ago to check if how your thinking is. For my opinion, unknown and illiterate. What has happened with the murder of Kennedy? Who did that and why?
Well, I have no expertise on Kennedy, but just coming back to one of the words you used, the fairy tale. So if you ask, if Alexei Navalny was still alive today, and you asked him, what's going on in Russia? Why is Putin doing what he's doing? What are his motivations? You would get the exact same answer that I've just given you, that word for word. If you ask Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who was a Russian dissident, who was a Russian oligarch who was imprisoned for 10 years, and now he'll tell you exactly the same thing, word for word. Maybe there'll be a slight difference in what the policy should be to address this. If you ask Vladimir Kara-Murza, who I was just with yesterday, word for word. And why do I mention these names? Because these are the guys who actually know what's going on, because they're Russians from Russia who have encountered the regime. The problem is that the people who are making the policy are sitting in the Pentagon or in some think tank somewhere, and they're not Russians, and they were all educated in some, faraway institution being taught something which has no relevance to what's going on today. It's not Kremlinology, it's criminology that you need to study in order to determine the policy towards Russia. And there's all these Kremlinologists, people who studied Russia, but who are politicians and political scientists. You need to be a money laundering expert to understand how these people really, what motivates them and why they're doing what they're doing, which is, I'm making headway. A lot of people read my books. A lot of people do believe what I have to say about this whole thing, but it's still there's a lot of and it's not even malicious. It's just, people studied the wrong thing. And they believe what they hear out of the Kremlin. So the Kremlin says, this is about NATO enlargement. And there's a bunch of people saying it's about NATO enlargement. And they also have these people they pay in Western governments that are Western politicians who are saying it's about NATO enlargement. That if we hadn't gone, Angela Merkel said, the Poles and the Estonians are partly responsible for the invasion, Putin's invasion of Ukraine. I mean,
Please.
Thanks. Thank you for your talk. I echo the sentiment of admiring your courage, and I'd encourage you to keep it up.
Thank you.
The closest that Mr. Putin came to hanging from a lamp was when Mr. Prigozhin, the Kremlin chef, sent his troops in that direction. That ended badly. My question is, do you think of the 1,000 people you identify as being in control, there is another Kremlin chef amongst those who might attempt the same? Or have they all been bought off?
Well, so the 1,000 people who have all the money are not in any control. So they're the biggest cowards that you'll ever have because they have the most to lose if they do anything against the Kremlin. And so if you watch how these oligarchs behave, and by the way, it's no different. Look at what's happening in America right now. All these American oligarchs are basically kissing the ring and telling the president, "You're the most brilliant person who's ever happened across the face of the earth," and so on and so forth. Rich people are the last people you should expect to stand up to Putin. But the Prigozhin thing was very interesting. So when Prigozhin was marching towards Moscow, it wasn't like there were snipers firing at them or blockades. People were taking selfies with the soldiers and giving candy to the tank drivers. If you watched Flight Radar, which is the app where you can see where jets are going, there was this massive takeoff of private planes out of Moscow and St. Petersburg. All people wanted to know, and it was dead quiet. There was no TV. Everyone was dead quiet because all anyone wanted to know in Russia was who's the boss, who's going to be the brutal dictator going forward. They don't care. There's no loyalty to Vladimir Putin. They just wanted to know who's going to be the guy so that they have to pledge their allegiance to keep their situation, whatever it is. And Putin really needed to make a point. And that's why there was a video of Prigozhin's plane crashing. I'm sure you've all seen it. It was like, he wanted everybody in the country to know that here's the video, here's the image, here's what's going to happen to you if you try to do this to me. And that's how he rules by symbolism, and he always has. And that Prigozhin was I know a lot of people that were rooting for Prigozhin, no matter how horrible he was, just because we wanted to see an end to Putin. But
I think we're drawing to a close, but there are two more questions. One is over here, please.
I think you're very, very brave. Thank you. What is Putin doing with all the money? Does he really need money?
Well, I mean, people often ask me that question, and before I was a human rights activist and an anti-Putin crusader, I was a fund manager, and I specifically managed funds for billionaires, and I can tell you with 100% certainty that there's never enough money for any person, and it becomes an obsessive compulsive disorder. The more money someone makes, the more money they want to make. Nobody needs these massive amounts of money. And how does Putin? What does he do with the money? He wants to. In Russia, you can't be the most powerful person in the world or in the country without being the richest person as well. And it's just part of the whole thing. He doesn't need the money. He can get money from anybody. He can extort it at a moment's notice. But it's just part of the psychology of being a Russian dictator to be the richest guy there.
One more question over here from.
Yes. Thank you for your time. Maybe I want to finish the talks. Putin already reached quite an age for Russian standards. What happens if he dies? Is there a brighter future? Who's his stand-in? Is he already planning that next to the war and everything that's now going on?
So Putin, he's planning to live forever. That's his base case. I'm sure he has the stem cell therapy, and he's got he's extracted organs from all sorts of healthy people in case he needs an organ transplant, and all that kind of stuff. So he's going to do whatever he can to live for as long as he can, using all immoral tools to stay alive. And again, straight out of Machiavelli, you don't want to make anyone your successor because they'll succeed you.
Wonderful how language works, doesn't it?
And so there is no designated successor. There's no heir apparent, and he's 72 years old. He could live. He could be around for another 20 years. Look, Trump is 79. He's going strong, and he's a lot less healthy than Putin. Putin doesn't drink. He works out. If Putin were to die overnight of a heart attack or a stroke or something like that, the most likely scenario is that the 999 other people who have stolen the $1 trillion are going to say to themselves, I don't want some government coming in that's not our government, and then they're going to want to take away our $1 trillion from us. They're going to want to preserve their money. And so as much as these people all fight among themselves, they're going to go into the Kremlin or some other place and come up with a status quo candidate to carry on, so that so there's not some new guy like Prigozhin that wants to take all their money away from them, and that's going to be that's the sad scenario. So the base case scenario is that Putin lives for another 15 or 20 years and he stays in power. If he doesn't, the most likely alternative scenario is they find a substitute who's a strong man and carries on some version of this same thing. And the least likely scenario is the one we were just talking about, where people get so angry that they rise up, and then there's a discontinuation. There's a discontinuation of the regime, and they put some other regime in place. I think it's more, the likelihood is like 60, 30, 10 of those three scenarios, and sadly, the 60 and 30 scenarios, 90%, and that's what we have to live with. However, the one thing that could change it all is if Ukraine wins the war, then people are going to be really angry in Russia. And that's another reason why we should help the Ukrainians win the war.
Yes, now that you mentioned it, his health of the gangster in the Kremlin, maybe you probably listened into the Reuters microphone at Xi Jinping's meetup in front of the palace in Peking, in Beijing, where they were discussing Putin and Xi Jinping about living for 150 years by transplanting all sorts of organs and new techniques.
I guarantee you that the FSB has identified people with exactly the same blood type as Putin, that if Putin has a kidney problem, they'll just go and extract their kidney or their liver or whatever it is they need. I mean, that's the kind of guy Putin is.
A real monster.
True psychopathic monster.
I think we'll leave it at this. There's much more to talk. And on this last note, I think it's wonderful how you talked about our world, the world we're living in, and sort of off the cuff, frankly, well thought, well spoken, very, very courageous. Remember, this is also on the internet, so I salute you for this, Sir William. I think it's it's good to. I think it's appropriate that you've been knighted. So thank you very much for being at the Bali. Hope to speak to you again, and hope to read your next book, probably on Vladimir Kara-Murza or on related things. And very important, hope you succeed with the rest of your work. So thank you very, very much for coming here. A warm applause for Bill Broder. Thank you very much.